It's time for Real Talk with Brian and Dan, the weekly talk radio show dedicated to discussing important real estate topics, plus insight into the local community. With a combined experience of over 50 years as local real estate brokers from the Eastside Real Estate Team at Keller Williams Realty Bellevue. Here's your hosts, Brian Levitt and Dan Edwards.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Real Talk with Brian and Dan on 1150 KKNW. It is Wednesday, December 4th, 2019, and I don't want to freak anybody out, but you have 20 shopping days left, folks, until Christmas.
Days.
Yeah, and if you're Hanukkah, it's even less. Anyhow, I'm not sure how many days, but it's a few days before. We thank everybody listening to us on 1150 KKNW and watching live stream on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you're ever interested in listening to past podcast/radio shows, you can find them on Apple Podcast or Google Podcast. Or even go to the Eastside Real Estate Team and you'll find a whole catalog of topics and some of our favorite businesses as well. Again, thanks for joining us. I'm so excited to welcome today. We have Dan Gelhay of Insurance Services Network and Pia Larson with Fingerprint Marketing. But of course, before we get to our guests, we always start out with some Real Talk. So today's Real Talk segment is about the true cost of not owning your home. Isn't that an interesting way to put it? The cost of not owning a home. And two myths that are holding buyers back. Why is owning a home more financially positive? Why is it better than renting? So what's one of the first things that a homeowner can or a individual can consider? Yeah.
It provides a tax savings. I mean, that's a huge one. Is one of the times in calculating what people qualify for, we call it buy a house, give yourself a raise.
Yeah.
Because if you go from a job that you have no tax deduction, I shouldn't say a job. We decrease the withholding. I'll get it right here. Decrease the withholding, thereby increasing the cash flow, which helps with home affordability.
Right. So most renters may not know this, but almost all, depending on your tax bracket of your interest. Right. Yeah. I talked to our friend Mike Market, CPA. Yeah. Shout out to you, Mike. It depends, but your interest on your mortgage is a tax deduction.
Right.
Right. So if you're paying $1,800 in rent, $0 of that is a tax deduction.
Right. And when you're paying rent, you're paying a mortgage, just not yours.
Right.
So
that's right. But there are limitations, right? Depending on your income bracket, your interest is tax deductible up to a certain point.
That's right.
So I don't want to just throw that. But most individuals can benefit from that. And, I don't know. When I was younger, I used to get really excited about getting a tax return back from the IRS.
Right.
Until I realized that I don't make any interest on that money that's sitting in their bank.
Right.
So, if you're paying a lot of money and getting a huge tax return, maybe that's good because it's a way to save money for a trip in the spring or something like that. But the interesting part about that is if you change how many allowable deductions you have, that increases your cash flow. Less is going to the IRS to sit in the bank before it comes back. So it's just kind of an interesting way to see the tax savings work for you. Another one, homeownership, it allows you to lock in monthly housing costs. How does that work, Brian?
Well, when you're a renter, the landlord can change that rent based on basically market demand. And there are some rules that limit in some jurisdictions. How much you can. But you're not in control. You're living in somebody else's house, and so. Well,
the interesting part is, on a monthly or yearly basis, anytime that lease is recast, I find it very rare that the landlords don't raise the rent.
Right. It's interesting as a landlord. There's times when I've had great tenants and I've not increased rents. When we finally do, they get upset. And it's like, I'm sorry, you're giving you a break. Yeah. So often my wife and I will do even a very, very minor bump just so they know that it's not fixed. But one thing about if you buy with a fixed rate mortgage, your mortgage never changes.
Right.
Your taxes and insurance could change, but those tend to be incremental. And so it's typically affordable. It's not a big bump like you might see with rent.
So if you could imagine 30 years ago, if you locked in your rent, right 30 years ago, how awesome that would be. And that's kind of the concept with locking in your mortgage because it is a 30-year mortgage.
Right. So next, buying a home is less expensive than renting.
How does that work? I see that.
Well, I look at rents in our marketplace.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times I can find a home for one of our buyers that they're going to be paying less once you factor in tax deductible, the tax deduction factor and everything. They're paying less than they'd actually pay for equivalent rents on a
especially
rental
in the downtown Bellevue area.
Right.
You're not getting a house to rent for $3,500 if you're lucky, right? I mean, in that area. So you gotta figure out there's going to be a commute issue there, right? Because you're not going to also live in downtown Bellevue for a $3,500 mortgage either.
That's right.
Number 4, no other investment. I like this one. You can invest in gold, but guess what? You can't live inside it. Right. So that's the part that I think Brian and I sell the most when we talk about selling houses. Is we sell the home ownership part, the memories.
You know what I tell people is the only time not to buy is if you're just not ready to put down roots. But if you know that you're putting roots down and you're going to stick around, buying the home just makes sense.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, the fact that you could buy for less than you can rent, the pride of ownership, that you don't have to call and ask permission if you want to paint a room.
Yep. If you want to take a wall down.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on if it's a load-bearing
Yep.
wall. I would always get the right advice. But.
Yep. So item 5, homeownership is a form of forced savings. My oldest son is very analytical. He's a brilliant guy. And he called me one day with a big question about picking the right stock versus putting the money into a home. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, that's the key. If you know how to pick the right stock, buy Amazon on day one, know. But what's the odds of that? Whereas a home creates a monthly savings plan. And the data is that, isn't it 45% more higher assets for a homeowner than a renter?
45 times.
45 times greater assets.
Yeah.
So it becomes a forced savings program that you get to live in.
So on the first question, we talked about a portion of that monthly payment is interest. Well, a portion of that is principal. That is actually you putting money in the bank.
But here's the other thing. In a market like we're in where homes appreciate, you're getting appreciation on the entire value of the asset, not your down payment.
Right.
If you put 20% in, you don't get growth on 20%. You get growth on 100%. So you're leveraging other people's money, and that's a big deal in real estate ownership.
So I'll sum it up with this. I know that a lot of buyers, a lot of renters, they're held back by 2 myths. And the 2 myths are that you need 20% down payment or you need a 780 FICO score or higher. Well, we know that's not true. We've been helping clients get into homes. And during our mortgage moment, which is coming up shortly, we will address these 2 concerns.
Yep. So that concludes our Real Talk for today. If you're interested in this and other topics we've covered in our Real Talk segment, please check out our blog at theeastsiderealestateteam.com/blog. If you'd like to talk with us directly, we welcome your calls anytime. Feel free to call us at 425-200-4093. Thanks for listening. Up next, we'll be speaking with our lender for our Mortgage Moment segment. Stay tuned after the commercial break. Hear more about the market from Aram Matvosov. Sorry, Aram, an experienced loan officer with Movement Mortgage. We'll be right back.